Greg Gorman is a man of many talents and passions. Known as a portrait photographer, Greg's work has been featured in Esquire, GQ, Interview, Life, Vogue, Newsweek, Rolling Stone, Time, Vanity Fair, and the London Sunday Times, and has been widely exhibited all around the world in numerous galleries and museums. Greg is a passionate teacher, traveler, and winemaker. And as you'll see tonight, he's curious, generous, and engaged artist who I'm proud to count as my mentor, my colleague, and my friend. Please help me welcome Greg Gorman.
When I first started in this business in terms of the realm of digital, Katrine was the very earliest mentor that I had. I barely could turn on a computer around 1999, and I went and spent 3 days in San Francisco sitting in the front row because I was worried I'd fall asleep, listening to people discuss digital and this whole new phenomenon of photography that I knew nothing about and desperately wanted to learn. And Katrine was one of the very few people that I actually understood and connected with, and now we both teach for each other, which is great. So thank you and SBA so much. So I'm going to share with you tonight kind of down memory lane from the beginning of my career up until some pictures taken maybe 2 weeks ago. And we'll start, we'll get this going here, with me in 1968 when I had hair and was a little bit thinner. I had borrowed a friend of mine's camera in 1968 to shoot a Jimi Hendrix concert in Kansas City. Had no idea what I was doing. Asked my friend whose camera I borrowed, what should I do? He said, shoot Tri-X at a 60th of a second at f5.6 and you'll probably have an image. The following morning I went to his home, and in his basement we processed the film, and when I saw the images coming up on the tray, I was hooked. This white piece of paper, this image coming up in black and white. And I noticed it was a little soft, and I wasn't sure in 1968 if it was because I had too slow a shutter speed or smoked too much pot at the show. But nonetheless, I was hooked and embarked in a career in photojournalism because it was the only course offered at the University of Kansas at the time. Music was an early inspiration. This is a portrait of Jim Morrison and taken in St. Louis a few weeks later. Abby Hoffman at a hippie love-in. And then this was also during the time of the Vietnam War, and four of us took a car and drove to Washington, D.C. and photographed the march on the South Vietnamese embassy. When I came out to California to finish my degree, I went to photojournalism school. It really wasn't what I wanted to do. I was a little bit restless, so I came out and enrolled in film school at USC, and in the spare time, started going around, and I did even a brief stint as a paparazzi. This is Jack Nicholson rolling a joint at a party right around the time of Easy Rider. I've published 10 books. You'll see pictures from most of them tonight, not all of them since this is going to be online, and I'm afraid you will not get the unadulterated Greg Gorman tonight because I've got to be a little bit safer than I normally am. I'll show you pictures from my last 3 books as well, a book called Framed, and my most recent book that's just been published called Outside the Studio. It's actually a book going back to my roots of photojournalism. When I got out of film school at USC, I photographed primarily with motion picture lights because I really couldn't afford to buy strobes at the time. And I was working with 1K quartz lights and 2K softboxes, and I was lighting everybody kind of right over the camera. Very flat light, Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, Tony Perkins, George Burns, and I'd print these pictures up big and I'd have them in my apartment in Laurel Canyon, and they all kind of looked like interchangeable postage stamps. Everything was brightly lit and clean and fresh, but I was still kind of struggling trying to figure out who I was as an artist, and I knew that I really loved photography, and it wasn't really until I started taking the light off the center focus, the center port of the camera, and started creating a relationship between my highlights and my shadows that I started to develop my style. This was an early portrait of Tom Waits taken in Hollywood. And in the early days, it was very, very different than it is today. We would get a lot of time with the talent. I had 3 days with Tom Waits, and on the 3rd day, when I was shooting, the record company said, we'd love to see you shoot Tom in a tuxedo. And I said, not going to happen. And they said, well, would you ask him? And of course, most art directors are afraid of their own shadow. So I said, sure, I'll speak to Tom and ask him. But I don't think it's going to happen. I said, Tom, listen, they would really like to see you in a tuxedo. And in Tom's inimitable voice, he said, well, the only way I'd wear a fucking tuxedo, I'd probably get shot. And so that was the impetus for the photograph. And later they spent $3,000, and this is back in late 70s, airbrushing all the blood out of the picture. for the album cover for Heart Attack and Vine. Being in the right place at the right time was a big thing, and I think what's been lucky for me and for a lot of people is there's so much great talent out there today, but so many people, it becomes overlooked sometimes because they just don't have that break. And I was lucky. I was working on a picture for Alan Carr called Grease 2, and Maxwell Caulfield, a young actor from New York, was starring in the movie, and Interview magazine wanted him for the cover of the magazine, and they asked me would I shoot him. And from that led to a long series and a long association with Interview magazine, Andy Warhol's magazine, for a lot of covers and a lot of stories. And it was these pictures back in those days that people were looking to. And we had total freedom in those days. We could hire whoever we wanted to work with. The talent was given to us. We did what we wanted. We didn't have any restrictions imposed upon us. And it made a big difference. Today, everything is so orchestrated. It's so fine-tuned. And the openness for kind of a freedom of expression has changed greatly. The early portrait of John Travolta, Tom Cruise. No one knew who Tom Cruise was when I shot this picture. He had just made a picture called Risky Business. We shot this in a park off Santa Monica Boulevard, and no one bothered us or even came near us. Arnold Schwarzenegger, also for Interview magazine, and Kim Basinger. And during this time, I was realizing, Kevin Costner, I was realizing the importance of building a successful team, a first assistant that kind of understood my needs, hair and makeup people that knew what I was looking for in terms of imagery, a stylist that recognized how I wanted to have people dressed. All of this kind of went into becoming part of what it was to create an image that became recognizable as my own work. Likewise, a team, a good studio manager, my own chef, everybody kind of together to try to keep this focus and vision to be mine. Some of the little bit of commercial work, Barbra Streisand for an album cover. I did a lot of work for GQ. This is just a few commercial jobs. Time magazine. And this was a cover for Life. We had all 5 girls in my studio, and we actually put them, I built a platform at a 45-degree angle so I could have a little help with gravity, and I laid the girls down, and I actually shot at a 45-degree angle back then. This was in the early 80s. This was the first motion picture campaign I shot for Tootsie, and there I am with Dustin back in 1982, and thanking him for helping me make the down payment on my first home. Andy Warhol, Dustin was promised a day in the movie where he got to become famous or do what he wanted, and he said he wanted to do a photo shoot with me and shoot magazine covers. So he's asked me who did I know that was famous that could come down and be in the movie with him, and I'm actually in the movie playing the photographer at that point. And I called David Bowie, but he was getting his highlights done, so he couldn't come down. But I called Andy, and Andy came over from the factory because it was just down the street off Union Square and was in the movie with Dustin for Tootsie. Early on, I was told by publicists so many things that if I had followed them over the course of my career, I probably would not have had the career that I've been fortunate enough to have had. Telling me with Al Pacino, oh, you know, put long lenses on, he'll probably throw you off the set, it'll be difficult, do this, do that. I followed my own thoughts, my own heart, and I just dealt with the people as normal people. I mean, certainly someone like myself is as guilty as anybody for glamorizing these people, but at the same time, they're no more important than the person, the plumber that comes to fix your toilet. They're just a profession. And Al was great, and I've worked with him for many, many, many years. And these were some pictures from Scarface. Poster for The Big Chill, and you can see the art director had nothing better to do than to cut them all out and strip them together on a white background instead of use the straight shot that we actually created. So the early part and the majority of my career was in terms of commercial work was motion picture campaigns. So here you can kind of see a splattering of some of the campaigns that I've shot over the years. Meet Joe Black, and this was just obviously a shot of Brad, and then everything else is added later. Howard Stern. Tomorrow Never Dies with Pierce Brosnan. And you know, some of the studios did much better campaigns than others. A lot of times they were just big headshots and on white backgrounds, but studios like Disney put a lot of energy and effort into their work and created this campaign for Pearl Harbor. For example, I shot Ben Affleck in the plane, but then the planes in the background and all of that were added much later. Campaign for King Arthur came right around the time of digital, actually, and the one shot of Clive Owen is actually digital. The other 2 were shot on film. Early days, art directors didn't really like and respect digital. They wanted that tangible thing known as film, and they refused to let us work in digital until they finally realized that we were getting the captures of a medium format camera with the spontaneity of a 35mm camera, and that made a big difference. Poster for Man in the Iron Mask. The score with Angela Bassett and Marlon Brando and De Niro. being able to shoot quickly with digital made a big difference. Celebrities don't have a long attention span, and knowing that I can capture the pictures in a third or a quarter of the time that it took to basically shoot film made a big difference. And you managed to capture, I think, stronger and more focused image because you managed to hold their attention much longer. The length of time we were taking to shoot Polaroids in the old days before we went to film just totally exhausted the actors and actresses. They just wanted to shoot, and we were waiting 2 to 3 minutes to see a Polaroid. So I did a lot of fight posters over the years with Oscar de la Hoya, Transformers, more recent poster for Hurt Locker, and for the Montreux Jazz Festival poster a couple years ago. When I started shooting, I shot a lot of young actors at the early age. Here's a very young Leonardo DiCaprio. And kind of through the years, and you can kind of see the transition. And one of the things as I was developing my style, in addition to my interest in taking the lights kind of off camera, creating a more dynamic range between my highlights and my shadows, was the fact that I really enjoyed shooting in very close and focusing on the actors. And I mean, if anything, I probably will go down knowing more for being known for shooting headshots and in close. I find the intensity and the connection much better, and I always begin my shoots starting in very close. Sophia Loren, this is when she was 60, and she told me, this is in 1994 in Rome, she said, "You know, Greg, I'm not 60, I'm a 3 times a 20. And David Hockney, here today, people, because of Photoshop, would have probably retouched the cigarette butt on the floor out, but he was a chain smoker, so of course we kept that in the frame. And shooting in close, I realized you needed to keep some sort of an element, some sort of a graphic to keep the pictures from looking like kind of high school yearbook pictures, particularly when you're shooting in so close. And this portrait of Grace Jones. And you can see a lot of the talent I've shot over the course of many years. And a lot of the pictures that I got for myself in building my portfolio in the early days came after a professional assignment. The assignments, sometimes they weren't always the most interesting, but they gave me accessibility to a lot of great talent. And at the end of the shoots, if the shoots went well, I would often ask the actors to stay and shoot something separate for me. And one of the things I learned early on, and one of the reasons I went back to film, to shooting stills, as opposed to pursuing a career in the movie business, was the fact that I'm a control freak. And with the movie business, they're always going to go for a better acting take, camera take, over a great still. And so one of the things I did is I loved the one-on-one relationship. I like to set up my shoots. I pretty much had a pretty strong idea of what I want to shoot and how I want to go about it. And that's what I really ended up doing. But one of the things I learned at the same time was the importance of being spontaneous. And here I had set up a shoot with Chris Walken. We had several things set up, but when he got up and walked over to my daylight wall, I felt this was a much more important moment than a lot of the static pictures that we'd set up to shoot. Nina Hagen, Jodie Foster, Meryl Streep, Drew Barrymore. And Sharon Stone was an early one that I shot very often in the beginning of her career, and this was a cover actually for German Men's Vogue. And around this time, my career was kind of taking off. I was doing a lot of magazine covers, a lot of motion picture campaigns, the ones like Tootsie and Big Chill and Scarface. And I went to New York to visit my late and dear friend Antonia Lopez, who's here pictured with model and now actress Patty Darbanville. And Antonia said, "So Greg, what have you been doing? What are you working on?" And I was in my early 30s, and I was kind of bragging, "Oh, I just did the campaign for Tootsie, for Big Chill, for Scarface." And I thought that would impress him. And it was ironic because he looked me in the eyes and he said, "That's awesome." But he said, "What are you doing for yourself?" And I realized at this stage of my career that I was nothing more than a hired gun. I was creating images, doing well, having a great time, a good run, but I wasn't creating personal imagery. And that became a very important part of my life and became something that I felt I needed to invest time in. And because so much of the early work that I had done commercially and on assignments had been in so close, I realized what I should do is kind of pull the camera back and maybe work on my male and female nudes. And that was really the birth of that part of my career. And I realized that I needed to maintain the integrity and the style that I had done in my work, with the relationship between my highlights and shadows, but pull the camera back, still maintaining the sense of shape and form and balance that goes into my imagery. This is a cover of my second book with Iman. Scott in the Waterfall, Tony bent over. But still creating that dynamic range and lighting, and trying now to work a little bit more with movement and still maintaining the shape and form and lighting. These are shot in my daylight studio in LA with a total top light and just reflecting bounce lights. 3 boys jumping. That was actually shot handheld on a Hasselblad. In the early days, there was no autofocus and no automatic cameras. One of the things in teaching, I love teaching, and I teach a course kind of all over in portraiture and male and female nudes, but the lighting between a male nude and a female nude is so different. Here you can see both pictures represent cross lighting, but here's a male nude, and here's the same kind of, but a different type of cross light on the female nude. And I think one of the things early on I realized is the importance of developing a signature style also with the models that you shoot with. And if you look at in history, you kind of see that Bruce Weber liked shooting more larger, more masculine guys. Herb Ritz was somewhere in between myself and Bruce. And I like to shoot more lean, sinewy models, more dancer types, more androgynous types. And these are two principal dancers from National Ballet of Canada. Early portrait also of Bridget Nielsen. This is an homage to my late friend Helmut Newton called Sisters with ring light. Echo in the Sand. Aaron. This young man went on to become quite a good photographer here in New York, David Mikulek. This is in Sicily. And oftentimes I say to my students, it's not always what you say in the highlights, but what you don't say in the shadows that kind of makes a picture more successful. If you've noticed, like in my early work, everything was so openly lit and kind of broadly lit, it really left very little to the imagination. And I think when I started introducing more shadows in areas, I think it brought more to the picture and left people walking away wanting to know more about an image rather than feeling like they had all the answers. This is a swimming pool study. This guy's actually holding his breath at the bottom of my swimming pool, and the kids, my assistants, are kicking the water up around the pool. Jaimin Hansu, we actually oiled his body and spritzed it with milk. Jaimin, again, he was the cover of my third book. We actually just did a mud mask on him for this photograph. Philip Glass. John Hurt, this is like my hand series. Andy Garcia. Liam Neeson. Bette Midler has been a client for better than 40 years. I've worked with Bette. Warren Beatty. And one thing you learn about talent, too, you learn when you're working with these people and why you end up building a stable of stars, is you learn what their idiosyncrasies are, how they like to be photographed, what they want to do. And when you come to a shoot, like with Warren, I realized it was about late afternoon light and very long lenses. And so when we'd start out, it wasn't a guessing game. We kind of knew where to begin. So we started off up here instead of back down here, trying to play by trial and error, what he's comfortable, how far he's willing to go before he's going to tell me, look, Greg, I want a long lens. Let's shoot at 6 o'clock at night, right before the sun sets. And it just makes the shoots much more comfortable, both not only for myself, but also for the talent. One of the things I do often when I'm shooting, if I don't know the talent, I'll spend time with them in the makeup room prior to a shoot, kind of seeing which features I want to play up in the highlights, which features I'm going to play down in the shadows, which angles work or look best. With Rosie De Palma, one of the big stars for Pedro Almodovar, there was no way to straighten this nose. So it was really much more about playing it up as a feature, but giving her kind of this Picasso-esque look. Great Don King, he was quite a character. Young Ashton Kutcher. Mila Jovovich. Johnny Depp for the movie Cry Baby for John Waters. This was a story I did for German Vogue. They said, who do you know, Greg, that would be an unlikely trio of famous actors that, or people that you could put into a story and do a little, like a 10-page editorial. So I called Eric Roberts and Billy Idol and Robert Wagner. And we had Billy and Eric with the girls in the back seat of the limo, and RJ is the limo driver. And you can imagine where the story ended up. RJ got the girls. And actually, we're shooting at one location and almost got busted. The police came, and RJ was so charming, he went and talked them totally out of the ticket and having us have to stop shooting, which was great. Heidi Fleiss, right before she went to jail and ultimately became a great friend of mine. I've shot her for a German Playboy. Twyla Tharp. Pacino, which is the one, as you know, who basically they told me would be very difficult. I saw Al a couple of weeks ago in LA and went up to say hello to him. We're talking, and he's asked me, what are you doing? I said, well, basically, I'm teaching a lot now and making wine. I said, I did so much in the movie business for so many years, and I said, I don't get it anymore. It's another world. Al said to me, he says, tell me about it, Greg. He says, I just started in 3 fucking movies. He says, I don't have a clue. He said, I just go to work and do what they tell me, and that's Al Pacino. So that tells you a lot. Marlon Brando, he was always a great subject. De Niro. Marty Scorsese and Sharon Stone. Pierce Brosnan. Boy George. Very young Barbra Streisand. Fergie, the Duchess of York. The late Timothy Leary and his wife Barbara Leary in my electric chair. Rupert Everett, Elijah Wood, Raquel Welch, this is with ring light. Raquel Welch shot with Polapan, which very few people probably realize that was the instant picture in the day. Rolled in that little crank black box, exactly, Katrine. Boris Becker, Elton John, Elton in the south of France at his home. Muhammad Ali, very young Mark Wahlberg, younger Mark Wahlberg even there. Debbie Harry, Julianne Moore, Window Light with a young Jude Law. Iggy Pop, Iggy on a bio break, obviously. The Barbie twins, which was shot for Playboy. Billy Eilish is a picture he actually used for his current biography. Jeff Koons, one of the outtakes from one of the series of ads that I did for Jeff that ended up not being in that portfolio of ads that he produced, but a picture I like quite a bit. Jeff was very funny. When I first met Jeff, he had seen a photograph I had done of David Bowie in Art Forum magazine. And Jeff called me up, and Jeff Koons, in his inimitable way, says to me, "Greg, do you think you could make me look like a high-profile celebrity living on the edge?" And I thought that was a classic. And no, Jeff was just kind of getting going back then. He'd done the basketball series and the Tanks and some of his very early work. John Waters' Lips. John always said this is one of his favorite pictures, but he said, "Who the hell would ever kiss me after looking at this? It looks like open heart surgery." Ed Harris, Michael Jordan, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Gerard Depardieu. This was a picture, for example, that came at the end of a shoot. I was doing the movie poster for Green Card, which was a very simple, flatly lit picture in front of a white wall with he and Andy McDowell. And at the end, I was so enamored to shoot him. And what was ironic, on movie sets, they have what's called craft services, which is where they have the food sitting out for you in the morning for breakfast and all that. We came in the morning, and we were pretty young then. We were myself and my crew, we were all hungover. Anyway, we get there, we go up to get breakfast in the craft services line, and there's like a half a dozen bottles of First Growth Grand Cru Bordeaux from Gerard Vineyards, which was kind of great. We thought we're dreaming this. Alec Baldwin, Oliver Stone. This is a good story. I mean, celebrities, they want to win through intimidation, and it's unfortunate because those insecurities are so unnecessary. And I was shooting him for GQ, and I was getting set up and getting things going, and I'm a chatty person, and we're talking, and I'm on a couple apple boxes getting the shot ready, and he looks up at me and he says, "Greg, can we cut the effing chit-chat and take the effing picture?" I stepped down off the crates, and I walked up to him at where he was seated to shoot him, and I said, "Let me ask you something, Oliver." I said, "When you make your movies, do you usually get it in the first take?" And he kind of looks up at me and he says, "No, not usually." I said, "I'll let you know when I'm ready to take your picture." Young Mel Gibson. And again, that spontaneous moment, I was shooting a female impersonator, Jimmy James, and he was in transition between male to female to do a portrait of him as Marilyn Monroe for an LA Eyeworks campaign. And this moment of transition, to me, was a far more interesting photograph than getting him when he was all dolled up as Marilyn. John Goodman, that was for GQ. Shirley MacLaine, Kirk Douglas, Betty Davis. She was great. I had an amazing run with her, and she was always fun and never short on words. Keanu Reeves, and this was a situation where today, and even then, publicists would kill a nude of Keanu like this and this nude of him from behind. And we were shooting, and like many actors do, I mean, they're usually generally not shy, and this was being shot up on the top of Mulholland. And we shot, and I'm waiting for him to change because he's standing there naked, and Keanu turned to me and he said, shoot it, Greg, it's okay." And I shot it, and the pictures came back, and I realized they were pretty good, and no one had seen these kind of pictures. And I called Keanu up, and I said, "Can you come over and look at the pictures?" Knowing fully well, if I had called the publicist, they would have probably been killed, and Keanu approved them, and they ultimately ran. Funny story, actually, about Quentin Crisp. He came in at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I said to Quentin, "Quentin, would you like a cup of tea?" He goes, "No, but a beer would be lovely." This is Divine, one of my late dear friends. And this is Divine with my assistants holding all his chins up behind the feather boa. Michael Jackson, this is behind kind of a netting. Michael was an amazing subject. He would always kind of come in prior to the shoot. He would call me and maybe 2 weeks prior to when we would take the pictures, and he would have amazing ideas, and we would discuss for like 2 hours on the phone what we were going to shoot. So when he came in, it was like, having had an art director kind of give you an idea of what's going to go down. And he came no entourage, great subject, very focused to work with. There's another one. He called me at one point, another shoot we did, and he said, Greg, I have these pet tarantulas, and they've just shed their skin. And he said, the skin looks just, like a snake skin that's shed. It looks exactly like the spider. And he says, I was thinking I'd bring him to the shoot. I said, well, bring him, Michael. Let's see what we can do. And he brought him, and we actually just kind of gaffer's taped that to his forehead. Mishu from Ringling Brothers Circus. Billy McNamara down in the desert. Joey Arias. Magic Johnson. Picture of the late Frank Zappa. Udo Kier. Martina Navratilova. And Jason Statham. Sir Anthony Hopkins. Late Philip Johnson. This was shot in the Lipstick Building in his office. David Bowie. This is almost my transition to my digital part of my life. This has all been analog. And here you see I actually shot David, very dramatic light. We processed the film in London on the Blue Jean video and made the prints, and we gave them to the makeup artist, and she basically painted all these shadows on his face and also put the gel into his hair. And this was shot for the Let's Dance album cover, front screen projection, single capture. So moving into the digital world was a big change for me because having been an analog photographer for so many years. This was actually taken with a camera known as the Foveon camera, where there was actually a Canon lens sticking out the front of a PC computer, shot of Diego Luna. And this was my first shot with a Canon, which is what I shoot with a Canon EOS. This is the Canon EOS 1DS. And I borrowed the camera. This is a young man who now has a very famous makeup line, Edward Bess. And he was a doorman at the 60 Thompson Hotel at the time. I grabbed him, we went uptown, and I had the camera for a couple of hours before I had to give it back to Photo Plus back then. And I couldn't believe how well digital saw light at low luminance, and I was pretty well hooked. First poster that I shot totally digitally with Johnny Depp. Diane Lane, that was from Under the Tuscan Sun. The late Paul Walker. Oscar de la Hoya, I did a lot of pictures with him. Hugh Jackman, you just saw. Quincy Jones, we just finished a couple of great campaigns you'll see a few pictures of here in a minute. Halle Berry. What was great too for me digitally, I'm a pretty straightforward photographer, pretty safe style. With digital, I knew when I kind of got my picture, and it allowed me to push myself a little further. And as well, it also gave a sense of security to the talent when they could see that the actual picture was on the back of your camera. And they will also play a little bit more than others. Billy Bob Thornton, Morrissey, Elton John, Penelope Cruz, Bernard Hopkins, young Heath Ledger, Diane Keaton, Elton. Again, traveling now for me, shooting digitally is so much easier. I travel with way less lights and gear. Everything is so much easier because so much a natural light basically can accomplish what we took a lot of gear to accomplish before. Sharon Stone, The Rock, father and son, Kirk Douglas and Michael Douglas, Brad Pitt on Troy, Tommy Lee Jones, Patrick Dempsey, John Waters for a campaign for the Here Network. More recent work of mine, two of the kids from Cirque du Soleil, from Iris. They were from Iris, now they're in a show in Las Vegas and soon to come to New York in a show. It's going to be a steady show here in New York, new show. Josh Hartnett. Harrison Ford was great. I told him what we were doing and shooting. I said, it's going to be digital. This is what we're doing. He says, do you mind if I ask you some questions? He had just bought a Canon EOS 1DS, and he actually came over for printing lessons. Bruce Willis, Luigi. It's an advertising campaign for Serengeti. Young portrait of Ben Affleck. Andy Garcia. The Lost Boys of the Sudan from a campaign I did for We the People, for a TSA campaign shooting across extraordinary people in the United States. Placido Domingo. Luigi and Luca. Some of these pictures are from some of my workshops. Alexander Pettifer, the late King of Tonga, who was a good friend. Manuel. Publicity shot for John Waters. Again, Alexander Pettifer. A lot of times we'll find people like Alexander, who is a muse of mine, and just go out and we create pictures for ourselves. We don't have to please anybody else. There's no assignments, and we just make our own pictures, pictures that he's proud and happy to have, and pictures I make with no restrictions. This is the late Liz Renee, who was one of the very early strippers who did a mother and daughter act, and she was the first gal to ever streak Hollywood Boulevard back in the 50s. And this is the daughter of Patty Hearst, Lydia Hearst. Again, this is Alexander Pettifer on a movie set. The last portrait I did of Patrick Swayze. He was very sad. We were friends from when he first moved to Los Angeles, and he called me knowing his death was imminent and said, Greg, I really need to do some pictures that can be around and show me as I was towards the end, that are not the pictures that Scabs had grabbed of him getting on and off of planes and in rough situations. And actually, his wife, his late wife, wanted pictures that were not even retouched, that were pretty straight out of the camera. We shot in the afternoon, and we knew when we said goodbye that day that it would be the last time we'd see each other, and it was probably 2 weeks before he passed away. Jeff Bridges, Pierce Brosnan, Aaron Paul, Jordan Miles, Charlie Hunnam, Cam Gigandet, Diane Lane. And I find a lot of young kids, and I love to photograph them. I like to follow them through their lives, and I shoot them as they age. You'll see several pictures of him, and I'm actually working on a book of a young man I've been shooting since he was 20. Started out doing nudes when I was doing some of my early male nudes, and I've followed him. He and his wife and family live in Berlin, and he's 45 now, and when he's 50, I'll do a book on his life, and most portraits and nudes. A lot of my personal work today stems from when I'm teaching workshops, because I don't do so much commercial work now, just really for friends and the people that ask me to do stuff, as opposed to pursuing that kind of work. So a lot of my work comes out of when I'm teaching, and you'll see a section a little bit on my workshops. This is Tim Mondavi up at the top of Pritchard Hill, where he has a vineyard. This was actually shot for a campaign for Epson for the 11-880. This is actually one of the young men you saw in some earlier pictures. This is shot through steam in a steam room at a very high ISO, very painterly. It's in Rome at one of my workshops. The same young man in the steam room that you saw earlier. In Siberia, I had a show in Siberia a couple years ago, and I shot that on the Yangtze River. This is outside of Rome during a workshop. In Graz, Austria, a very famous musical composer. This is my friend that was in the pictures you saw of the two boys flying. This is one of the twins, and he wanted a portrait of he and his wife. And his wife was pregnant. This is actually her belly, and I thought it so much, this is a single capture, looked so much like a Henry Moore sculpture, so I just used her belly as a graphic element with Andy behind her, Andy Atherton. Young dancer again from National Ballet of Canada. Elton, I'm on Elton's board of advisors for his AIDS Foundation, and Elton called me and said, when he was having his first child, and said, Greg, we should do some pictures before the paparazzi and all get the pictures. I think we can sell them for a lot of money for the AIDS Foundation. And so I went up and shot Elton and David and their first son, and then we did it again. But the first shoot we did raised $1.5 million for publication in 2 magazines for the foundation, and all the money went to the foundation. This is Elton and David and their 2 children. There's my attempt at children's photography. The Holly Woodlawn out of makeup. Very few people have seen Andy Warhol's superstar Holly Woodlawn out of the character that he always portrayed in the movies. Marina Abramovich. And some of these are from some of my workshops. This is one I did recently with Priscilla. We shot in the Berkshires. And John Watterson is funny. John's one of my closest buddies, and we went out to shoot the book cover for him for his latest book. And when we were out shooting the pictures, this was just a setup shot for the book, and it ended up being the picture he liked better than anything we shot on the professional day, which was when we shot him with hair and makeup. It ended up being the picture for his book cover. From my workshops that Katrine teaches with me in Mendocino, California, in the sand dunes. It's a young man. This is a workshop we did in Berlin, actually. And I shot with a very dear friend of mine, had a very beautiful studio, and his paintings are quite spectacular in a beautiful daylight studio. So I actually did a whole series of Neil's in front of using the paintings as backdrops. Again, this is Bernard Hopkins, who I got to come out and do the Canon video with me. They wanted me to have somebody to shoot. They said, we want you to shoot a sexy girl, and we want you to shoot something like a nude, Greg, but we can't put a nude in a Canon video. So they said, what can you do? And so he was the world heavyweight champion boxer, and I shoot a lot of boxing, so he came out and was gracious enough to be in the movie with me. Andy Garcia, that was for Wine Spectator recently, from one of my workshops. Morrissey. Just recent pictures from workshops, where I get the chance to capture pictures for myself. There's a workshop we did in Spain last year. It's great being able to teach and travel around. It's kind of what I do a lot these days, is teach and work on my wine. This is up in Mendocino. That's in the coast of Spain. That's the wife of Phil Spector in my electric chair. And this was in Berlin at that Bielitz Heitung out in the country, in the hospital. And these are some pictures from my workshop in Norway. Great singer, Jacob Collier, British singer, very talented. From workshop last spring in Mindo. Actor Alexander Pettifer. And this is a couple of ads, a recent ad for Maybach with Quincy, and another campaign we did for Buscemi shoes. Looking pretty good at 82, I think, 81, 82. Pierce Brosnan, Bette Midler, Floyd Mayweather for the previous fight that he did. Udo Kier. Barry Humphries, this is the alter ego of Dame Edna. This is his politician character that he plays. And this is Cuba. This is a young man who's here tonight. He's sitting in the back. He's going to come in and actually model for our class next Wednesday, which I'm very happy that you're going to make it in, Cuba. That's really fantastic. And also, I like to shoot models for my classes that are models that I'd shoot myself. And he's been great. I want him to come up, hopefully, and model for me up in Mindo one of these days. Francis Kobler, I shot for The Spectator recently. And these I just shot about, I guess it's probably been now 3 weeks because we've been here and in Mindo. But Grace Jones, which I shot down in Jamaica for her book cover. There was the crew, the Jamaican crew. The two Asians in the shot are actually my assistants. The girl was my makeup artist, and Wynn was my assistant, and the rest were all local staff. Personal projects, we talked a little bit earlier about when I started doing my male and female nudes, creating projects that were kind of more personal work. So this is a project I realized, what did I have that held together as a single body of work? And these are portraits of young actors in the beginning of their career. And I oftentimes do a lot of my own personal layouts. This time I actually laid the book out because I didn't like what the art director that the book company had given me did with the pictures. I didn't feel that they made the pictures make sense, so I took the pictures to Mendocino and actually laid them out in InDesign. That's the staff that I work with when I print my books. Those are the art director and the actual foreman on the press. I've done 3 books with them. And these are some of the young actors: Channing Tatum, Rob Lowe, Kevin Bacon, Leonardo DiCaprio, Patrick Dempsey, Tom Cruise, James Franco, Josh Hartnett, Mick Jagger, very young David Bowie, Charlie Sexton, Jared Leto, Mark Wahlberg, very young Brad Pitt, John Mayer, Matt Dillon, very young Kevin Costner when he actually did the movie The Big Chill, but they cut him out of the movie. Mickey Rourke, Johnny Depp, Chris Atkins, and of course they always do a limited edition book at these events. They want to have a book that they can sell, and there's only 2 nudes in this entire book, and of course they picked the nude of Chris. And the importance of maintaining relationships, here's Chris today, and Chris and I signing the prints for the limited edition book. And my next to the last book I did was a book called Framed, and it was a campaign for LA Eyeworks, and it was one where we also were given total creative control, and I think it's why the campaign was so successful for 30 years. And it ran an interview magazine, and basically I was in charge of finding the talent, and my cousin, who's here tonight, Lynn Gorman, her brother, actually was one of the creators of the campaign with Gary Johns. And these are some of the pictures created for that campaign. To David Hockney, Frank Zappa, Grace Jones, Pee Wee Herman, Mickey Rourke, and a lot of them are the people that you've seen in my other pictures. They would come in for a shoot and I'd con them into doing an ad, which they got paid very little money for, but it became a challenge for me to convince these people to be in this book, and we really shot a lot of great talent. As you can see, Debbie Harry, Patrick Dempsey, Leon Russell, Boy George, Brian Ferry, Carly Simon, George Clinton, and we had a real free rein on what we wanted to do and how we wanted to go about it. John Lee Hooker, Sharon Stone, Shaka Khan was funny. I was shooting Shaka. I was actually shooting Louis Anderson, the comedian. He's a big, heavy-set guy, and Shaka was a big gal back then. I just reminded her of this last year when we had dinner, and Shaka was coming up the stairs to the studio, and she saw Louis sitting in the chair, and she turned to her and said, well, I guess it's Greg's day for shooting fat people. Very young Drew Barrymore, Divine. And these are pictures from my last book, and this was a real challenge for me because, for me, being in the studios with the likes of a Brando or a De Niro or Pacino is second nature. I've done it all my life. But putting me on the streets with a camera and putting a camera in somebody's face, I was a nervous wreck. When I started doing the pictures in Southeast Asia, when I was over there on other assignments, I started shooting with point-and-shoot cameras because I was actually afraid of taking a big camera and putting it in someone's face. And I realized the importance that I still needed to maintain my style of lighting, but it became much more difficult being in there and being in front of people that I was not familiar with in unfamiliar settings. A lot of these are in India. Still always shooting people. I've never been a person that was very good or interested in shooting anything that couldn't talk back to me. So for me, it was always about people and the communication and connection with people. These I realized I needed to shoot very quickly because as soon as you turn a camera on someone, no matter what their plight, they would be smiling. And it would kind of destroy the image in the moment. These are eunuchs in Delhi. I was lucky to have Steve McCurry gave me his driver when we were over there, so I had a great kind of fixer driver to take us around. Most of these are in India. The faces were just incredible. These guys were going to work there on the back of a truck. And out of that came another project called 9 Days in the Kingdom, where I went over as one of 50 photographers to Thailand to celebrate Thai culture and in celebration of the king's 50th birthday. And it was like me trying to learn how to do something very different, shooting motion, but still maintaining my sense of lighting. So this was a great project for me. It was like me taking a workshop. And we would be waiting for the light, because oftentimes we'd shooting under freeways here. We'd have to wait till the light got very low to shoot. And then in the rings, figuring out how to set the exposure and get the right, just enough movement to give you that feeling of intense pressure and all, but not go overboard. And so now at this stage of my life, I'm primarily doing my exhibitions, working on my books, teaching and making wine. And the last part of this talk is kind of on where I'm headed at these days at almost 66. So this is in northern Germany in Zingst, having an exhibition there. This is what the current exhibition that's traveling is. It's kind of a collection of my greatest hits and then usually pictures from my latest books, all of which have been printed by me on an Epson printer. Mostly shot with Canon. The older stuff, obviously a lot was shot with Hasselblad. William Klein in St. Moritz a couple years ago, and Steve McCurry. And this is like what sometimes the raw spaces look like. This is in Graz, Austria. This is the show when it's being shipped, the space before it's developed, the advertising campaigns that go into promoting a show like that, a big show like that, the billboards for the bus shelters. And just like my books, I lay out all my own shows personally. I attend almost all the openings if I can. And I sequence the pictures. And this is that same space, as you can see, in Graz. And usually give lectures prior to the opening, and this is like opening night. Other exhibitions this was in Bologna, Moscow. These were all within the last 2 years. And this was in Norway, Nordic Light, and this is actually a portrait of the lovely Mary Ellen Mark and Bruce Davidson. We were all there lecturing together and had a really nice time together. Martin was with her. It was really great. She was always one of my biggest idols and one of the most giving and caring people about her students, and all. It was a tremendous loss. This is obviously at a party for me after one of the openings in Italy, or in Switzerland, I should say, with Tina Turner and Peter Lindbergh and Oliviero Toscani. Signing posters at the Montreux Jazz Festival. And this was in Siberia, Istanbul a couple years ago. I'm just getting ready to head over to Istanbul for a big project. Helmut Newton, a show I had 2 years ago, and I have another show coming up with him, actually, fortunately, this winter in Berlin. Show I just had earlier this year in Tarragona, Spain. So the next stop, workshops and wine. This is kind of the end of my talk. So now today, I mean, like I mentioned, I've done 40-some years of working in the movie business, and I just kind of felt like I've kind of been there and done it. The styles today are different. The looks and feelings and mentalities change so much, and rather than become bitter or become someone that wants to change an identity that it took 40 years to figure out who I was, I realized it was important to do something that I still loved, and that is photography. And so that's really why I'm enjoying teaching now and giving back a lot for what I'm so passionate about. And now the passion stems more from teaching and seeing people realize their vision in our classes that we do together. So this is a lot of pictures kind of on the workshops I'll just share with you quickly. This was in Copenhagen. And these are some of my students' pictures that were actually taken during some of the workshops up in Mendocino. And no, Jed, there's none of your video in here. Seth will be very disappointed to hear that, I'm sure. We had quite a good video that starred Jeb, a very important woman in his life. This is at the beach in Navarro Beach with the sun-bounce reflectors in Austria, which is where I'm headed, up in Mendocino. And now I was working so much with big, heavy, fixed tungsten lights, and now I shoot mostly with LEDs, the great Innova lights from Rhodolite, which are just the Rhodolites, which are just extraordinary lightweight lights. And it really, I think where lighting is going, more continuous light, lightweight lights, and lights that stay cool up in Mendocino. You can see I've often, because of being in the movie business, there's Kramer in the background, Michael Richards, who took a couple of my workshops. This is in Berlin. Hamburg, up in Mendocino with our silks and all from Sunbounce. This is in Budapest, on the streets outside of Rome, Ronciglione, actually in Calcutta, where we shot, up in Mendocino. There's the gang shooting. And I really teach how to see light and understand light. This is a girl that I shot in Stockholm, and the next picture is her just turned 45 degrees away in my daylight cage. This is where we're headed this next week after my class here with Katrine to Austria to shoot. Budapest, the bowl at... And often my students say, well, Greg, your pictures look good because everybody's so beautiful. You always shoot beautiful people. They said, well, what if you have to shoot a normal person? So I said, pick someone in the class you want me to photograph. So they picked this young man. And I dressed him in these clothes from the castle. And I took this picture in like 5 minutes with window light. And the next frame is him holding this print. Kind of great. He was a good guy. He was a good sport. Teaching with, there's Katrine. And here last year. And these are some portraits from a workshop I do in Norway, just faces of Norway. And these are all student portraits, just kind of really strong. Go kind of quickly here so we get through this. That's in Mendo. And the last few pictures I want to share with you, more than a few, but not too bad, was wine. Wine was always a big passion of mine as photography, and I realized at this point in my life I should pursue my other passions, and one of the big ones was wine. And I was asked to shoot a label for a winery that owned by Oren Swift, called Papillon, and I shot a label here shooting the vintner's hands. And that night I went to Dave Finney's home, and we figured out the label, and I built the label, and I told him I always wanted to make wine. And he said, well, we should do it, Greg. And he's been great and generous, and so now I'm actually producing a couple wines with him. This is actually another label I shot for him for Mannequin. But I started out just like a lot of you that are in my class here and going to school here at SVA, learning, being an assistant, going out, studying the grapes, being in the field, learning from masters. And again, for me, I realized making wine was nothing more than like attending a casting session. All the talents coming in for the casting, kind of reviewing the models, so to speak, that are coming in blind, no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm just trying everything, sorting it out, pairing everything. Same as doing a casting. Then we're seeing how we pair everything together, discussing it with the team of what we feel is going to work, what's not going to work, how it's going to go together. They try to see it. They share my sentiments, or if we need to make some necessary changes. kind of going through the last pairing before we cast to do a photo shoot. Making our final decisions with the producer, let's say. Seeing how they're going to work together. Now putting the elements together, the clothes, the wardrobe. Here working with the barrels and the oak profiles for the wine so that everything kind of fits together. Doing the final mix right before we're ready to go, and then putting out the packaging, which would be the magazine layout. And here you see where it'd be on press, so to speak. Press check. Seeing the final product, and then what do you have to do? Get out and promote the product. You get out there with talent to kind of help push you. This is at wine dinners in Kansas City. That's at Jasper's, Lynn. You remember those guys? Things with John Sally, King of Tonga, with friends, Pearson Keeley. Wine dinners at my home, Elton and a few classics, Johnny Depp and all. Johnny Knoxville and some other classics. And finally with my buddy Stone Cold Steve Austin, Steve in my cellar, and also spending time with winemakers and enjoying my other big passion in life besides drinking wine and making wine is fishing, which of course my dear Uncle Sam, Lynn's father, taught me how to fish back when I was 6 or 7 years old. That's it. Thank you very much.
I'm always interested in knowing what's that moment for each photographer that has come to talk to us over here. So I always tend to ask pretty much the same question, I guess. What was that moment that you realized you made it as a photographer?
You know, it's funny because my career as far as making it happened so fast that it almost went by me without really realizing what was happening. I did Tootsie, The Big Chill, and Scarface all within 2 years of one another. And 3 of the biggest movies, 3 very big movies. And so I realized, you know, when all of those were going through, and I got people like Dustin Hoffman and David Bowie and Barbra Streisand, Bette Midler as clients, that it was going pretty well. In the early 80s, like I was 33 years old, 32, 33.
There's hope for you.
Just stay true to your form and true to your heart. Shy group, Katrina, no more questions?
No, well, many of them have you in class. They'll
Yeah,
ask you
that's true.
tomorrow.
Ema there has a question, maybe.
Where can we get some of your wine?
Ah. Well, we may do it. I may have a little bit we can sell online, but most of it is out of California, through California, my distributors in California. I don't make very much wine, so I'm making a Pinot this year and I have a Cab.
So if you think back just in terms like, you know, the history of our culture, who would you have loved to have photographed that you haven't had a chance to photograph?
Well, I had always wanted to shoot Gorbachev, still around. That I always wanted. The 2 people that I always wanted to photograph, and they're both still living. The one I really wanted to photograph more than anybody, and still to this day, strangely enough, and I had a great idea to do a book, but she's a bit humor impaired, and I think it just won't happen, is Bridget Bardot, because as a kid, she was my hero and idol. I liked her, you know, the most of all the great female sex symbols. And I thought, what an, you know, and I don't know how many of you know about her now. She lives in the south of France. She lives a very modest life. She's an animal activist, and she never had any work done, and she looks like a woman that would be her age. It's a very old lady. And I just think to follow her and document her the way she is today, to do a book like that would be incredible. And I've approached her, but it just is something that hasn't interested her. I think it would be an amazing documentary to just go with, you know, like a fly on the wall and follow her for a couple of weeks and just photo, and I should just have total access to everything and shoot. But she's really on the top of my hit parade and has been for years. This is a young man that I photographed recently through a mutual wine-making buddy of mine.
So what was your best and worst photo shoot?
Best and worst photo shoot? I would have to say probably the best would be split between getting to shoot David Bowie for the first time and working with Betty Davis. And the worst is probably I don't really want on tape. I will tell you as long as you cut it from the video, okay? But you know, I've been blessed, not so many horrible ones over the years, and the ones that were horrible I've forgotten, honestly. You were certainly fun to photograph. Couldn't have had a better day than I had the day we had recently taking pictures. It was amazing. Anything else? Well, okay, thank you all very much.
Oh, you have a question? You can,